Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're going to take a look at how to assemble a 50-foot Athearn gondola, D&RGW. So let's get right into it. First of all, we're going to open up the box and see what we got in the box. Now, I always like to keep the lid off the side upside down, putting parts and stuff in. And as you can see here, we're going to start off with the body. So we have the body, and that is going to just sit over here off to the side. We should have a bag of parts. We should have an underframe, and we should have the detail part to the underframe. So we're going to those. There should also be a manual. Now, I highly recommend going through and reading any of the manuals that you do have with these. A lot of them do have little pointers and tips and stuff like that on it. This one's pretty basic. There's really not much to it. It's mostly just a parts diagram, really, is what it is. All right, there's no actual instructions, which is kind of why I'm making this video. All right, so you're gonna put that off to the side, and also in here there should be a metal weight. Very important. All right, so we're gonna put that off to the side. Now, one of the most important things that you really need to do with this stuff here is we're going to have to inspect it. When they do it at the factory, there's all kinds of flashing and all kinds of little stuff that we have to go through and inspect each piece. So first of all, we'll start with the body. Usually the body is pretty good. Not too much that we're going to have to do with the body. You want to make sure the underside is nice and clean. There's nothing sticking up. Actually, there's a little piece there. So we're going to take our X-Acto knife, and you want to just kind of trim off anything that's sticking up in the middle. Alright, trim that off there, nice and smooth. Next, we're going to take a look at the weight. Now, the one thing that you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure that the weight is straight. And one of the ways you can do it is by actually turning on its side and looking down the edge of the weight. Now, as you can see, this one here, it's a bit bent. So what we're going to want to do is we just want to give it a little bit of a bend the other way until we get that looking nice and straight down there like that. Okay, so that looks pretty good there, nice and straight, much better than it was. Okay, so you're going to want that. Next, looking at the framework here, you're going to want to go through and typically with your X-Acto knife, trim off any of the flashing. You got to get all the flashing off. You really want to make sure that the underside is nice and smooth. Now you see these little pieces over here, they go around the edge of the weight, so they actually don't need to be trimmed off. But you want to go through here and make sure anything in here is nice and trimmed up and there's nothing sticking up. Typically at the ends there will be a little bit of stuff sticking up. You trim that off. Make sure that's nice and flat. Now the next thing you want to do is where these little tabs are and the hooks go, you want to make sure that there's no flashing on any of the sides that are going to hold the clip so that it sticks up, so that it's not going to clip onto the actual piece there. And you have to make sure these are in good shape because you want everything to stay together. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. Now the sides here too, there's some flashing on the sides. You trim the sides down a little bit, make sure it's going to fit in the body. Alright, that, and same on the other side. Okay, so done there. We're going to look at the detail part here. Now this does go in a certain way. We want to make sure, again, check to make sure there's no flashing or anything that's sticking up on here. And you'll notice when you look at it that the parts will actually stick up on one side and then the other side will be all nice and flat. Now you want that flat side to be sticking up when you stick it into the other frame, and it just pushes in like that, and there you have it. Your under frame is almost together. There's a few more steps. Now we've got to open up our little bag of parts here. Now I like to stick the parts into the actual lid so that you don't lose any of the parts. They don't go rolling all over the place or anything like that. And inside here you should have 2 sets of wheels, 2 of the horn and hook couplers, which we will not be using those. Those are really outdated for today's standards. You will find a couple of clips, a brake wheel, and 2 screws. So what we need here are the 2 clips, because next we are going to put in our hooks. And I have some KD couplers here that we are going to install. So we're going to need 2 KD couplers. And that one's missing a spring. I'll touch on that later on how to put the springs in there. So we got 2 hooks, and then we have 2 of the springs for the hooks. Alright, so what we're going to do here is the spring goes in first, like that. I want to make sure that it fits in there and it is seated properly on the bottom and sitting flat. Now, do the same on this side. If it's not sitting flat for you, check and see if there's any flashing or if there's anything that's sticking up that you might need to clean off. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to sit our hook in here, and we're going to sit our hook, well, we'll do one side at a time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And now, for KD couplers, they say to lube it with a dry graphite lube. And that's because if you use any kind of oil or anything like that, it actually attracts dirt, and dust and stuff like that can actually get trapped into the coupler box. So unfortunately I don't have any of the graphite, so I am going to use oil for video purposes today. So basically what's going to happen is lube it up, and you're going to stick that on. You got to line it up for it to clip on there. Now what you're going to want to do is to make sure that it's clipped on properly. Make sure it's pushed down all the way, and just give a tiny little squeeze with a pair of pliers, and that will make sure that it is clipped in there properly. So then we'll flip it around and we will do the other side. Now you also want to make sure it's going to move freely like that. Okay, so we will do this side here. Little drop, just a very, very tiny little bit of lubrication in there. And then we're going to set it on. And just give it not too much. You don't want to get very aggressive with this. They are delicate little pieces of plastic. And again, make sure that it's moving and it centers itself after it goes back. Okay, so there's your undercarriage done. So we got our weight, we got our undercarriage, now the body. Now the body, with this gondola, there's not really very much that is going on with the body that you have to do. Basically, you just have to put the brake wheel on. So the brake wheel here, ideally, it would be nice if you could just stick the brake wheel on and have it stay, but it's not going to. Again, trim off the flashing, make sure that it's going to sit down all the way and be seated into the body. And we are going to have to use a little touch of glue, not much at all. You really don't need much glue. And then you'll stick it right in there like that. Very nice. Now, ideally it is better not to use glue if you don't have to, but in this case, we did. Alright, so now you got your body there. Your weight. Now, you can take and paint the weight if it's really rusty. I'll show you that, guys, that in a different video. But typically, a lot of people, when these are brand new, they just stick the weight right in there like that, and they don't do any painting. Now, a lot of people like to paint it black so that it matches the underframe and everything. Me personally, because I have so many of these that are already metal, I paint them a steel color just so that it matches. I mean, you don't really see the underside anyway. It's not that big of a deal. So we got the weight in there. Now we're going to stick our frame in there. Now I always like to stick the air brake parts closest to the brake wheel. I mean, that's really preference. It doesn't really matter. Sit it down in there like that. Very nice. Okay, so next what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sticking the wheels on. So get the wheels out here. One wheel on this side, one wheel on this side. And we're going to stick our screws in. So, like so. Sometimes you'll have to clean the holes in there if the sometimes the mold's not very good and have plastic over top of it. You'll have to clean out some of that stuff. Screw them down. You want to make sure that they're snug, but the wheel still has movement. Alright, you want to make sure it's still free but secure. Same with the other side. Make sure it's snug. You don't want to over tighten it, it's just plastic. Make sure the wheels are free. And there we have it. Okay, so now that we've got it all assembled, we need to do a couple other things. Check it out, make sure that it's going to work properly. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to stick it on a piece of track I have here. Okay, and we're going to look at the hooks. Now, I don't know if you guys can really see it that well. Do this here, okay? So basically, that little piece that dangles down from the hook there, you want to make sure that it's going to be just above the rail. You don't want it catching the rail. There's actually a measurement for this. I'd have to look in the KD book to get the measurement. So that one's pretty good. And this one over here, that one's pretty good. So there's not much that we have to do with that. Now there are special tools that you can get for bending the hook. I use these guys right here, coupler trip pin pliers. These are KD tool. Very handy, very helpful to bend the hooks. So what you do to bend them is you take this little pair of pliers right here, and one side is cupped or curved and the other side is a pin. And so what you would do is you would just take and pinch the hook like that, in there like that, bend it a little bit, and then recheck the height. You stick it back on the track, and then you can recheck the height after you're done. Now the other thing we need to do is check the coupler height. Now to do that, we're going to use the NMRHO standards gauge. Now it's not expensive. As you can see, I spent $10. That's $10 Canadian. And this is basically what it looks like. Now what we're going to be doing right here is we're going to be using this hole. Okay, you can see that hole there? That hole is the coupler height hole. And this here is for the track. So what this does is this here sits in the track, and then you could measure the coupler height. Sits in there like that, and measure the coupler height. See, this coupler height is actually too low. So what we would need to do is we would need to put a different hook in there. Some people put washers under the wheels, but what you're going to do here is you would take and put some couplers in. So basically what I would do is I would stick a underset hook in there, right? So this is a medium underset shank. So it's a medium length and the shank is underset so that the hook sticks up further. So you place it out with these hooks and that it'll line up with the coupler gauge height there pretty well. Alright, okay, so let's say you need to change your hooks because they're sitting too low like this is. Alright, so we're going to take and flip it over, take our wheel back off. Alright, pop our under frame out like so, and what we're going to do, take your flathead screwdriver and just pop the cover off like that. The hook will come out and we will change it over to the undersets. Put the clip back on like that. Make sure that it is seated properly. Give it a little squeeze like that. And then flip it around and do the same to the other side. Take off that. Take out the hook. Put the underset hook in. Put the cover back on. Make sure it's set properly. Just give it a tiny little squeeze again to make sure that it is clipped in there properly. Making sure the hook moves freely and bounces back to the center. There we go. And then we can stick the underframe back on. The underframe back on like that. Wheels and screws. Just like that. Okay, now we'll stick these hooks back in that bin there. And now we have underset hooks. So we stick it back on the track and we get the gauge back out and we want to line up the hook. So you want this center hole here, when you stick this in the track, you want the middle line of the hook to line up with that hole. And so this is perfect. So this now has the proper height of hook on it. And we didn't have to add any washers or do anything like that. We just made sure we put the right coupler on there. And again, you're going to have to make sure that the distance from the tail to the track, it has that little bit of a gap so that it doesn't catch anything, and so that it will work on the decoupling, the KD decoupler. All right, so there we have it. That's all assembled and ready to go. Let's go try it out.